field, and it's a static electric field, so just like house wiring and stuff like that. Some studies, there's people basically
So Lawrence Cole is here with us, our hometown favorite. Lawrence is a song elder and ritualist based here in Port Townsend. Lawrence has been co-facilitating and offering community grief tending for over 10 years all across the US and Canada at gatherings such as Singing Alive, Village Fire, River Song, Network for New Culture, Dance Camp Northwest, the Northwest Permaculture Convergence, Esalen Institute, and a lot more. Lawrence teaches workshops in songwriting and the art of listening, songs for climate change, earth stewardship, songs about minding our natural manners. His primary teachers and influences have been Saban Fu and Malidoma Some, Angeles Arian, Michael Mead, James Hillman, Francis Weller, Joanna Macy, and Martine Prechtel, who I know are inspirations for a lot of us here. He's an advocate for restoration of mutually flourishing community for all our relations, both human and beyond. Welcome, Lawrence. Also, I'd like to welcome Chris Kevorkian. Come on up, Chris. And I want to ask that Chris is asked to be off camera. So just want to welcome Chris here, and then she's going to be sitting in the audience, and we'll pass the mic over to you when the time comes. So Chris holds a doctoral degree in thanatology, which is the study of science and the study and science of death, dying, and bereavement. She has focused years of research on environmental grief. She's a faculty member in the MSW program at Walden University, where she teaches classes on trauma, crisis, and disasters. She hosts and facilitates a monthly death cafe in Gig Harbor and is founder of the Legal Rights for the Salish Sea, an organization dedicated to educating communities and stakeholders about getting the rights of nature to save the southern resident killer whales and the Salish Sea herself. Thank you, Chris, for being with us. I also want to welcome Dar Jamal. Did I say that right? Jamal. Dar Jamal is an award-winning journalist and mountaineer who reports on human-caused climate disruption and the environment for Truth Out. And prior to joining the Climate Beat, he was one of the few uninvetted journalists to report extensively from Iraq during the occupation following the 2003 invasion of that country. His stories have been published with Truth Out, The Guardian, The Independent, Foreign Policy in Focus, The Huffington Post, The Nation, and Al Jazeera. He's the author of The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. And he lives here in the Port Townsend area. Welcome. Also here is Rebecca Wildbear from Colorado, Durango, is that right? Rebecca is a soul guide and somatic archaeologist who supports individuals to discover and manifest their truest gifts. She guides people in opening their sensory bodies, engaging their dream world, and accessing deep imagination. She has an MS in counseling from Johns Hopkins University, and she utilizes her training and experience with yoga, hakomi, and somatic psychotherapy to support people in listening to the mysteries that live within their own bodies and within the animate natural world. A therapist and wilderness guide since 1997, Rebecca guides with the Animas Valley Institute and is the author and creator of Wild Yoga, The Alchemy of Playing and Praying. Welcome. Over here we have Charles Eisenstein. Oh, that guy. Charles Eisenstein is a speaker and writer focusing on themes of human culture and identity. He's the author of several books, most recently, Climate, A New Story. Also, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and Sacred Economics. His background includes a degree in mathematics, philosophy from Yale, a decade in Taiwan as a translator, stints as a college instructor, a yoga teacher, and a construction worker. He currently writes and speaks full-time and is an inspiration for many people at this conference, including myself. Thank you for coming. So I have these chairs set up for us, but we could just make it a lot more informal and just like all gather around in a big cluster, whatever you guys feel like you want to do. But I do have some questions prepared, and I'd love to just get started. And one more housekeeping thing from Joanna.
I forgot to mention, we do have some evaluation forums, which helps us to improve the conference and give good feedback to all these amazing presenters. So I'll come around and hand out a few, and I'll be collecting them here by this door at the end. Thank you so much.
Another thing to mention is that tonight, after dinner and after the keynote speakers, we will be having a grief ceremony that will be in the 204 building, which is over that way. So we'll be kind of talking about what grieving in this day and age actually looks like and what it means, and then we'll get to experience a little bit of ceremony together from 8:30 to 10:30 in the 204 building. I think it's going to be upstairs, so just look for us there. So let's get started.
Yep.
Lawrence, hi.
Yes.
I'd love to talk with you. So you've called ceremonies, grief ceremonies that you do, a technology, and you've called them the glue of community. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. How do these ceremonies work? What do they look like? And how do they function as a glue of community?
Well, the thing that called me to the work back in the early 90s was when the teachers from Africa, Malidoma and Sabon Fusome, came from Burkina Faso, and they were sent here by their elders. Their culture had been under the onslaught of colonialism for some hundreds of years, and they were still holding on to traditional culture, but very wounded and wondering. They sent, first of all, Malidoma out to find out what's really going on out there in Europe and the West, and came back and described it, and they said, geez, it sounds like these people don't know how to grieve. They don't know how to grieve their ancestors. They don't know how to access the long-term vision and the long-term wisdom for making sure that the world will be ready for the coming generations in a good way. They just don't seem to have that mentality at all. And that's what they meant by community when they said, in their promotional material, they said, grief ritual is our glue for community. It's what helps hold us together. And I've been so interested in community and how people could live well and keep falling back in love with each other and keeping both living authentically and honestly and also respectfully with each other and the rest of the living world. And so this seemed like a key, so I started going, and I realized, wow, a group of strangers can come together in a couple of days of doing grief work. Suddenly they are making lifelong friends, they're experiencing a depth of connection. And then when I started doing this on a more regular basis down on Bainbridge Island, I'm just realizing how it forms bonds that are so lasting and so rich and feel integrated. I come to realize that in our culture of separation, as Charles calls it, many others, this isolation and loneliness and the need for commodities to fill the longing to belong, and to recognize that you can't fill the longing to belong with belongings. You can do it only through recognizing that our wealth is each other. And so that's what happens in this kind of ritual, is that we begin to realize, wow, everyone is carrying some medicine, so their stories actually nourish, and we hold each other and stay the course with each other in a way that we never do in our ordinary lives. And we're off the clock, and we're going to make sure everyone gets to the end in a good way. And that end often is very joyous because of what we've done and what we felt together. And that's something that sticks with you. And so I always say grief ritual is my idea of a good time. And so it does seem to be a kind of essential, palpable, connective tissue, and vibrational tissue, I guess you could say, but you can feel it. You feel it, and it's something that's different from any other thing that I've experienced, and I've been looking for a long time. So.
Thank you. Did you bring a poem by any chance? You had mentioned some poems. Yeah, I wanted to invite you to answer some questions, but also to share a poem if you wanted to first.
Here's one that's by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, called Father Earth. There is a 2-million-year-old man no one knows. They cut into his rivers, peeled wide pieces of hide from his legs, left scorch marks on his buttocks. He did not cry out. No matter what they did, he held firm. Now he raises his stabbed hands and whispers that we can heal him yet. We begin the bandages, the rolls of gauze, the unguents, the gut, the needle, the grafts. We slowly, carefully turn his body face up. And under him, his lifelong lover, the old woman, is perfect and unmarked. He is laid upon his 2-million-year-old woman all this time, protecting her with his old back, his old scarred back, and the soil beneath her is black with her tears.
So Rebecca, in order to bear witness to this black beauty and bear witness to the loss in nature, you lead grief ceremonies in wild places. And I've heard you advocate expressing grief aloud in nature, aloud with nature. You've described grief and sorrow as wild. So why is this important, and can you tell us a little bit more about how this type of wild grieving looks as opposed to the way we normally think of grief in this culture?
Yeah, well, one thing about wild is you don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't look a certain way. Sometimes you think, oh, it has to look like this, sometimes rage is a form of grief, sometimes tears come, sometimes they don't, sometimes they overtake us. It's a surprise, partly. It's also a surprise sometimes when our tears come and why they come, and when the anger comes, we don't know. It might not be to the story we think it's going to happen to. We suddenly get moved by something. Sometimes it can come in the longing for, we can feel what we've lost. Sometimes it can come in particular stories. I have my own stories. You probably have your stories, the kind of stories that can dial it up, the things that I could perhaps start talking about that might mean I'll start falling apart a bit as I think about this and that. So there's plenty there to open it to. And I could feel it as we were about to get started here, because I'm a river guide, and it feels like to me like getting on the river, really, like because I really want to get on the river. There's no place else I want to be, but I also really don't want to get on the river at the same time. I really rather just go someplace safe and comfortable. So I can feel that terror of like, oh no, are we really getting on? And oh yeah, like this is where the life is. Let's go. But we don't know where we're going. We don't know where the river's going to carry us. We don't know if it's going to flip us and drench us in the water, or splash up on us. And it's like that in this process. It's like wonderful to cry. Like I can love it when the dam in me breaks free. I've written poems for years to get the dam to break free, to get the tears to come. And it's great when they come, and it's also so scary. But it's like where we need to, where it's what's here, it's where we need to go.
So Dar, as a climate reporter, you've witnessed so much destruction firsthand. Yeah. So how do you work with the grief that this generates? And I know that you've spoken about a hope, and that pitting hope against hopelessness isn't really a choice at this time. So I'm just curious how your process is about how is your work affecting you personally, and how does grief figure into that? And if you'll speak a little bit more about the relationship between grief and hope and hopelessness.
Well, first I want to say I was joking with Rebecca halfway, right before we started. I feel like a little bit of an imposter on this panel, because I think the other three people have done a lot more work in the grief realm and writing about it or teaching about it or helping people process it. And I'm here because my work has forced it upon me in an extremely dramatic and precise way. Also, Nala and I were talking right before we started. I researched this book and had been writing about the climate crisis for about a decade as my primary beat as a journalist. And it's one thing to have all that information in our heads. And then the book forced it upon me of going out to places. It's one thing to read about the fact that the Great Barrier Reef is in terminal stage and is not going to be here another 10 years. It's another thing to go snorkel on top of it and all you can see is the dead white coral. It's one thing to write about what's happening in the Amazon or read about it. And it's another thing to go and meet with Thomas Lovejoy in Camp 41 and hear him talk about it. I guess my point is that anybody that can just read about what's going on and think they understand it and without letting that sink in is you're not understanding it, And I think the thing I would impart is that my work as a journalist and author writing about the climate crisis is not going to be accurate if I don't go all the way down through the grief process. I can't really see and get what's happening, like to the level that you don't remove 93.4% of the heat that we've generated into the atmosphere from the oceans, because that's where it is. You're not going to fix this. You're not going to turn this around. You're not going to not lose the Great Barrier Reef. You're not going to not be in the sixth mass extinction. Okay, let's be real. And then you have to go through that grief. And then decide how you're going to be. So it's not about hope or hopelessness. It's about how are we going to fail, as Stephen Jacobson puts it. What is the manner of our failing? How are we going to comport ourselves during this time? And then for me, I'm going to write a lot more honestly. And it's not just the facts. It's about what's really happening here and how are we going to go through this together and how are we going to treat each other during this time. And I mean each other, I mean all species. I have no idea if I answered your question, but there you have it.
Yeah, I mean, you've said that humans are, keep the mic because I want to keep going. Humans are in a hospice situation with the planet, with the industrial culture certainly is inarguably in hospice. And the future, you've said, is guaranteed to be pretty catastrophic, but that we can do the right thing anyway, even if we don't expect that to change the planetary crisis. So I'm curious, what does do the right thing anyway mean?
Thank you. Yeah, last June I met a Cherokee elder named Stan Rushworth who reminded me of the distinction between, in Western colonial settler mentality, we have rights. What are my rights? You know, versus indigenous wisdom, which teaches us we're born onto this planet with obligations to serve the planet and future generations. And so if I get up today mostly concerned about what my rights are versus getting up and asking, okay, whatever I pray to, the great mystery, how can I best serve you today? And what actions can I take to best serve future generations? So regardless of however bad the outlook is, and it is bad, I have no shortage of things to do. So, you look at the kids, the climate strikes, the walking out of school. How am I serving them? Am I doing enough? What else can I do? There's, it's limitless, it's bottomless, the motivation to get up and do things. And I'm actually extremely excited and interested, while simultaneously I cry every day reading what each report is because I know exactly what it means. The most recent devastating study that comes out, like most recently the permafrost is basically melting away before our eyes to the point where scientific instruments measuring it can't even stay on top of it that fast. Yet, how am I going to comport myself during this time and what are my obligations? And so I have found a deep and abiding motivation now and a fierceness to serve. And so that means, I think, bringing a gumption into everything that I do that just wasn't there before. But of course, that's after going through the whole grieving process repeatedly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned children. Charles, you have 5 children? 4? So, 4 children. And a broad age range, I believe. So I'm wondering, as a father, how are you talking to your kids or being with your kids about what's going on? I'm thinking about the Extinction Rebellion, and if your kids know about that. And yeah, I have more questions to ask about, philosophical questions, but I'm also interested in this topic of parenthood in this time.
Thank you for the question. Well, so for me, grief is about standing in the whole of reality and not just part of reality. Grief is a way that we incorporate loss and death and ending, not only into our minds, but into our bodies and into our relationships. It's the partner of celebration, which is another way to bring in all of reality. And if any of those are lacking, then we are going to be walking in a delusion. That is one reason why we're able to treat the world as if we're not losing what is precious, because we have not sufficiently internalized the experience of loss that comes through the kind of grief work that Lawrence is doing and that traditional cultures understand. So in my parenting, I just strive to introduce my children to the full spectrum of what is real on this planet right now. And being careful not to export onto them whatever unprocessed grief that I carry. It's not to bludgeon them with the horrible things that are happening, which might give me a kind of a release. But I guess I am learning, after having done this for 20-something years, learning how to recognize what is the next horizon to bring to them. And also realizing that most of it is not under my control, actually. The world is a more thorough parent than I can be.
Thank you. So in your book, Climate, you've discussed how the framing of the debate around the carbon narrative and scientific predictions about what's going to happen in 50 years or even 10 years is actually part of the problem, that we're focusing on a specific place and ignoring a whole bunch of other more embodied, visceral experience, and that we can't frighten people into caring, and that we need to make the loss personal. That commitment is coming from beauty and loss and love. So what does actually motivate us to change, and what role does grief play in that?
Yeah, maybe the question is, what motivates us to make what kind of change? Appeals to self-interest and fear might motivate a certain kind of change. But they don't motivate the kind of change that we need the most right now. They might motivate decarbonization policies, but I think that from a living planet viewpoint, what we need to do is to protect and heal the organs of this living being. And these organs include forest, wetlands, soil, water, cultures, species. If they were all healthy, I don't think greenhouse gases would be that much of a problem. But the fact is that they've been degraded for thousands of years. On their own, any single one of these small places on Earth, if you're appealing, how can I put it? If you're appealing to self-interest and fear, really what is in your self-interest or the self-interest of a given city or a given nation is for everybody else to make the changes and not you. For you to cut down your forests and to drill your oil and somebody else to plant other ones to compensate for it, to offset it. Therefore, we need a different kind of motivation. The motivation that even if carbon emissions weren't a problem, I love this piece of land. So I don't want to take too much time speaking about this because I am going to speak later, but I'm just coming more and more into contact with people and organizations that work with people who don't even believe in global warming, but they love their soil. They love their farm, they love their land, and some of them are doing enormous service that is visible even in the carbon narrative, but much more visible from the perspective of a living being in relationship. But yeah, I feel like that's going to take us way, so let me just halt for now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to steer it back around towards how the grieving process actually can move us toward feeling that connection with the land. How does that open us up? And if anyone is willing to share as these questions come about how that looks in your own personal practice, that's very welcome. We're all kind of making this up as we go along about how to get back in touch with things that allow us to feel deeply, to get back into our bodies.
I'll make one really little thing here. Just like I was with my wife walking on these tidal pools in Rhode Island where she grew up, and there was some algae growing in one, and there was a little bit of seaweed in one, and some snails, and I was really enchanted by the snails. And she was like, When I was a kid, there were fish in there were crabs, there were sea anemones, like this place was alive, and we shared some real grief there. Was that grief because I made an implicit carbon calculation that the missing shellfish would produce less calcium carbonate and thereby endanger our future? No, it was because these are friends, these are relations, these are beings. I love them. That's where we have to go. And we can't go there if we're not experiencing the grief from the places and beings that are being lost. It's part of bringing reality all into our bodies.
I would just say, if you've had a full, I'm just surmising, maybe I'll even ask the question, how many have noticed after a good cry, like really where your belly's engaged and you step outside, maybe you just, and something that you've looked at 100 times, it somehow catches your eye and you see it, and oh God, I've never really noticed that, the way these leaves are made. I've never really noticed this, the petals on this flower in quite this way. Has anyone noticed that kind of thing after a cry? Yeah, a bunch of you. So, it's an interesting thing that in the Chinese 5-element system, the metal element is what is the official of releasing grief, and they include air in the metal element, but it's the precious metals and the precious minerals, the most precious being, of course, air. So it's about what matters most. I think those two words, metal and matter, are very closely related. What is most essential, and what do we love the most? So when we grieve, actually it cleanses the windows of perception and it helps us drop into what Charles is talking about, this capacity to be in love with, and sometimes it's because we miss it. But we feel that, and that reminds us of how much we love it and how much we want to take a stand for that. It just happens, but it's important in our culture that we shame grief and that we say things like I fell apart or I broke down or all these kinds of things that are kind of shaming, rather than I just washed my windows of perception. I just stimulated my whole perceptive capacities. I'm actually coming to my senses through my grieving in such a way that I perceive and experience the world as a sacred place, much more so than before. And that's why I say it's a good time, because we come through it by holding each other well all the way through it. And you have people that can go and be in a natural setting and sing a song and feel the sacredness of where they stand in a way that wouldn't have happened prior to having that time together.
Chris, I'm going to turn the mic over to you for a little while. You've described our society as death-phobic and grief-phobic. So how can we become more conscious of grief and death, and why is it important for us to do that in relation to earth repair?
Thank you. I just want to thank you too for allowing me to be on this panel with such amazing people, so thank you. In answer to that question, I'm not sure if it's ever really going to change, because we're a society still built into asking for a pill to fix us. We want instant gratification. And if you look at all the other issues that are involved in what we're talking about, income inequality, environmental racism, all these things play a huge role in our grief. And the fact that we don't even acknowledge that half the time. Corporations have free will and free reign to do whatever they want in our backyards to whomever they want. And we don't get to say too much. When you were mentioning rights, I just keep thinking we have to speak about rights of nature, because that's where our laws come from. Indigenous people speak about nature as family, as relationships. And that has changed our worldview, just learning more about rights of nature and how that's changing. Ecuador, Bolivia, Lake Erie just got rights of nature. But it also seems kind of weird, yeah. But they're fighting it, so we'll celebrate more later. But it's fascinating that we fight so much about learning. And grief to me, and I shared with you before that I walk with grief, because grief is a great teacher, as Lawrence was saying. Grief teaches us to live fully. Walking with death teaches us to live fully. And if we were doing that, I think we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in these days, where so many people are not capable of grieving in a healthy way. They look to other people, so they may choose drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, work, instead of taking time to listen to the grief and what the grief can teach us. But then we also work for companies and organizations that only give you, at the most, 3 days for bereavement leave. So our society tells people, get over it, which are the 3 words I hate the most. And so how and when and where do you find the time to walk with grief and to allow grief into your life? A few people mentioned about crying. When I was a hospice social worker, one of the first lessons I learned was that there's stress, that's a chemical in your tear ducts that relieves stress in your body. So I would always emphasize and encourage people, cry, let the stress out of your body, or else it's going to manifest in another physical way. But if we could be conscious of our grief and learn from it, listen to it, I think that we'd be so much better off. And if we could listen not just to ourselves, but to our wild cousins, because we're the ones who are destroying their habitats, and we forget that we're part of the ecosystem and we're destroying them. One thing I want to mention really quick, Nala, if I can, is when I was working on my dissertation, and it was on environmental grief, and I focused on the southern resident orca, my doctoral committee complained constantly because all my writing was angry. They said, it's too angry, you have to rewrite. Well, I was writing about the Salish Sea, the toxins in the Salish Sea, the pesticides, everything, and the fact that, when a mother has her first calf, that the first calf dies because of all the toxins from the breast milk get into the first calf. And they were upset that I was angry. And what am I supposed to be? And why would I just, wash this down? It's just, I think we need to speak our truth more and speak the words that matter. Murder is one word, killing is another, and I think killing is a stronger word. We're killing our environment. I'm not sure we're at the hospice stage. I know we're at the palliative care stage. I keep hoping, because my worldview is different because I've been in hospice, that hopefully something can change. But it's a tightrope that I think we're walking. So we may be at the hospice, but I'm still hoping it's palliative care. But my worldview is much different. I'm the granddaughter of an Armenian genocide survivor, and he was my role model, and he taught me how to grieve and to be with it. And so I was born with it, and then, Kevorkian came into it, so I have the name for it, so it just seems to fit. But I think that if we could think leaving today and then leaving tonight's ceremony, if you could just consider walking with grief on one side and death on the other side of you, and see how you feel each day, how that might change your worldview and change your view. There's a lot of horrible things happening, but all I can think about are the flowers that are up there, and thanking God that I have color vision. So I could see the different shades of green and the different colors, and those are the things I focus on, and the mindfulness and the love and the children who are kicking ass. I'm part of the Climate Reality Project with Al Gore, and it's growing and growing and growing. And so there are so many things that we could focus on. We may be a little too late, but again, my hospice thing is, I've had hospice patients who were supposed to die in 6 months who are still alive after 6 years, 8 years. So I hang on to that hope, and I know I'm overdoing the question. I apologize.
Thank you for that, that idea to envision ourselves with grief on one side and death on the other. And that's something that we can, I mean, you can go ahead and start feeling that right now, seated next to you, and then certainly through the rest of this conference and again at the ceremony. You know, I was going to ask if people would just share a little bit about what works for you personally, little rituals or little somethings that you could share with us, since it's so intertwined with the work that you do. I'd love to start with you, Rebecca. How do you help guide people? What are some suggestions that you could give?
I just wanted to add, if it's okay, to a little bit to the conversation that was happening before. I think one thing that we're taught is not to cry and not to feel in general, which makes it really hard to think about diving into a grief ceremony. We could say, oh, great idea, but then everything in our bodies goes, no, we learned a long time ago that's really dangerous, and I can't. And one thing that has helped me is that I feel like the earth loves tears. The tears are a gift, if that's how it comes out. And whatever way we express our grief, it doesn't have to be tears. It can be rage, or, I mean, there's even emotions. Rage is thought of as this, evil, bad emotion, just like in your example. But the way we share our heartbreak with the earth is a gift to the earth. The earth wants to hear it. And that does relate to your question. Personally, I go out to Ponderosa Pine in my neighborhood and cry when I'm home. Most days, I tell a story. What is the story today that's evoking tears about the situation of our world? And I share the story, and the tree speaks back, and we cry together. So, with people that I work with, related to the question you just asked, it's kind of like getting back in your body, because it's like if you were taught to never do this, how do you? And to me, that starts with what I consider a very sad story, which is. I actually labeled the Holocaust of the wild human soul that often starts in public education early on, when we're forced into desks to sit in a chair and go against our very nature, what the little bodies want to do, like don't cry, don't move, don't breathe, don't say anything, and definitely don't be outside. It's everything that's wrong. And so then we wonder, why is our culture sick after how many years of that, a lifetime of that. So there's we're sick, the earth is sick because we're sick. And that's not to say that we're bad, it's just to say that we have an illness. And I speak because I had an illness. I had cancer in my chest here, and my 2 lymph nodes when I was 21, which I think of as liquid grief, because I learned not to cry at all. And there it was, liquefied. So I had to learn to cry for it to move. And tears are like the rivers running naturally, and a damned human is the same as a damned earth. It's damned. It's, there's nothing alive in that. So with the work I do with people that you asked, it's like, how do you wake people up after everything has gone to sleep and everything has gone numb and everything has learned to just survive and tolerate? A lot of what we do, I feel like, is a trauma reenactment. Whether it's forcing ourselves to keep sitting in the desk beyond when we actually don't even have to anymore, because that's what we learned, or whether it's we're so angry that we, that we act out that unconsciously. I was a psychotherapist for a number of years, and if you think about it, the most sick people they call suicidal or homicidal. Well, that's the direction that most people are going. So there's a huge mental illness, and I do a lot of work with people that want to come back to life, and it really does work. I've done it for a long time, and it works. And I think my latest rant is just that I really want the education system to be different, because if our human if our human animal is going to be different in this world, if we're really going to shift as humans, it needs to start young. It needs to, and what I grieve is my nephew, my 12-year-old nephew, because I watch him and I just cry because I just watch him. So, but the practices that I do, it's entirely possible. We're inherently wild. I mean, this body once lived indigenously too. We all come from nature-based people. And it's in our DNA to return to that same state of moving and breathing and singing and crying and being in ceremony and revering the earth as a sacred being. It's a sacred being. It's not about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year. It's not about that. It's about right now. It's like the earth is a sacred being. It's like it's not a commodity. Like, let's start now. And so it's all related, and it happens when people come back. It can happen for people. And I really wish that it could start younger, and it was a part of, for everyone. It was available to everyone, and it started early.
Do you want to speak, Lawrence, about some personal practices that help grief in your life and help work with people in your life to encourage their grieving?
Well, I like what you said, that it starts with the children. I mean, the whole reason for our meaning and purpose, really, Robin Wall Kimmerer says, if you want to think like an indigenous person, just don't make choices that don't take into account the coming generations. Are we going to thrive because of what you're going to do today? Are you doing something to make way for that? And we've just recently, I was just down doing a 4-day grief tending and training down in the hills above Santa Barbara, and there was this one couple, we desperately want to be here, but we have a 8-month-old baby, and I said, well, this is about learning how to be a people in village life. They got babies and those kind of things, and so what we found, and also here on Maristone Island, we have at least one long grief ritual over a long weekend where children are included. And they come and they go, and people can be in the midst of the whole range of grieving, and they get it. I mean, this 8-year-old, he would lead us in expression, and we just mirror it back to him. This is like Simone said, when children are born in her village, all the young children are brought to the birth hut, so that when they hear that first cry, they all cry back, so it knows that, hey, we get it. It's tough coming into this world, and you've just been in a great place, and you just, of course for them, it was sent here fully loaded, and these people are going to be, but it's still tough. People are going to welcome you, and they're really interested in who you are from the get-go. But in our culture, that crying is kind of shamed and shut down from very early on. Let them cry it out, and we start doing the healing around that through letting the children be our teachers and letting them be included and start feeling how great that feels. It's part of we've done this several times now, and it just feels so great because it is part of the natural way and when they need to go out and be on the land or whatever, they just come and go, and it's a part of a flow that works so beautifully. So, what are the practices are just, I'm doing this several times a month quite often, so I'm just loving how it's more than just working personal grief. It's becoming, learning how to be a people together, and it's learning how to make friends with grief, that, as it's been said, this is something that, you can begin to feel like, wow, it's been a while. And I actually have a hard time fully locating my grief on my own. I love being in a circle where we're doing it. The energy of the community is a very powerful medium for, as long as there's that resonant field where things are welcomed, and that includes the whole array of grief feelings, including rage and fury and just in fear, and the whole array can come up, and we just hold it well together, and when there's that container, it starts to move. And so it's a great gift that we give to each other, and we need each other. Civilization, I say, is the culture of make-believe that we don't need each other. We don't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And it's like, so it's happened. People don't know their neighbors. They don't know that they need each other. And this is the way to start reclaiming that kind of community that invites the wholeness of aliveness. So it doesn't necessarily make you feel really great right away, but you will feel more alive, more authentic, more in the fullness of what's true for you right now. And your friends, your people are willing to hold you. We become permissionaries for each other's reality without trying to fix or make it better, but just welcoming you into what's true for you now. And that's how it feels good to be together, because there's less dissembling and more authenticity.
Any more sharing that wants to come through about?
I think for me, when I was working on this book, where essentially I went around to a lot of the hot spots like the Amazon, the Great Barrier Reef, Denali, etc., and wrote really, really personally and viscerally the best I could with what it was like to see what was happening so quickly to these places. And it was, the gift of it was that I got to go out there in all that majesty and beauty and be in awe for these places. And several of them I had long-term relationships with, and the splendor and everything that comes from being in those places, with those places, and then having my heart broken over and over and over. Like I remember one instance in Alaska. I went up there to go to some other places, but I went out to this place. It's nearby Portage Glacier, about an hour outside of Anchorage, and there's another glacier called Byron Glacier, and you used to have to kind of traverse up like 200-300 feet of ice and walk across this glacier to get up on a ridge to go climb Byron Peak. And I went back there, and that whole glacier is just gone, like literally gone. And I'm talking 12 years ago is when I was climbing up there. And then that was just a few years ago. So in short time, just gone. And like the rest of it were like way up. It was a hanging glacier now. And it felt like a gut punch. It literally felt like, I was out there by myself, and it just felt like someone just hit me in the gut and took my breath away. And I just, just getting broken open by that. But then also having to dig deep down, and then like, I love what Lauren said earlier, that coming to my senses, because then it's like, then when I go to these other places, while there is still glacier and ice, and just being so present with that, like it's here, it's right here, right now, and this is worth working to fight and protect and try to save and just be with, and I think it's like that cycle has kind of become inculcated in me from my work, and I feel like it's been this huge gift that the earth has given back to me through this work of just getting broken open repeatedly, falling in love with this place, seeing what's happening to it, being completely broken open to that, and it's just been this cycle that's been trained into me to where now I can't just like read the research and see these reports. Like now when I see them, it breaks me open, and I cry regularly. And sometimes like I'll be writing another climate dispatch and have to just go outside and stand and look at the trees and watch them swaying in the wind and go like, okay, you're still here, I'm still here, we're still here together, okay, gonna keep doing this, and just like that, of just like finding my own kind of rhythm. And like what you said, like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm making it up every day. It has to change every day with everything that comes in, and sometimes I still want to check out, but it's the allegiance to life you know, because the other thing is, like, I do look at what's happening and what's baked into the system, and it's going to be really, really grim, and yet life persists and life will live no matter what, and given half a chance. And that, you know, I've gone from being the guy that was like, there is no way humans make it through this, full stop, to the guy now that points to stories like there was a rattlesnake extermination that happened in California, in a place where a lot of people wanted to just wipe out all the rattlesnakes because they were afraid of them. And they almost succeeded, but then those that they missed started having rattlesnake babies that within 2 generations started to be born to not grow up and have rattles. So that, like, is not supposed to happen, you know? And there's a lot of stories like that, you know? And so we don't know what's going to happen. We know it's going to get even more intense, but my point is that, you know, either I'm alive with life or not. And the cost of admission for that is, you know, getting broken open on a regular basis, you know, and that's a real gift. That's a real gift, you know, because, and I'll close with, this is way better than the guy that came back from Iraq. And my best solution to that was kill the entire Bush administration, ideally by public hanging, and kill everyone in the US military, and I meant it. And I went into a Joanna Macy intensive, and it took about 3 days for that guy to be broken open. And then I started crying, and I cried for a week, where about halfway through the week, I remember sitting right beside her at one point, and she just looked down at me, because I literally didn't stop, like all day, I was just like, and I sat right beside her, and she just looked down at me at one point, she was like, you're just my little faucet. I'd rather be the faucet.
Here's to being a faucet. Yeah. I was thinking of something that you said, Charles, about that we're all Lamarckians now. That scientists are starting to realize through epigenetics that traumas can be passed down, that even memories can be passed down. And so we hear a lot about that in the news right now. But what isn't often focused on is that we have a lot of resilience that's also passed down. There's a lot of people who died out, but we are all standing here, and that's because our ancestors were smart and fast and is calling for that. So we're here to learn how to open the faucet again, you know, not just keep tightening down on it. So we do have a few more minutes left. I'm wondering if you are willing to take some questions from folks in the audience for a few more minutes. Would that be all right? Do you all have any questions?
Hi, I'm really glad that this panel's happening. So I worked in elder care for several years and became acquainted with anticipatory grief, which is a little bit different. And I guess I'm wondering about the scale and how we can support each other, especially in the midst of a sixth mass extinction and events of that scale. You know, like when your dog dies, you know, even when you know that your dog is going to die ahead of time, you go through that process and you grieve. What if there were no other dog on the other side? What if it was all dogs? That scale, you know, like how do we address our grief in that context? As a community, I think it's a community effort, because it's obviously a community experience.
So Therese Rando came up with anticipatory grief, and we talk about it a lot in hospice and helping patients and their families deal with the loss of the patient, slowly but surely changing roles and so on and so forth. And when you mentioned about the dogs, I've tried to write a book on that for 12 years, as long as I've had my dog, and I just can't do it. But I think it's something that we're looking at. I think the most important thing to do is to be open, again, to what the grief is teaching us. I think community helps a lot, getting in touch with other people, and being with other people. I was really fortunate. Ram Dass, does anybody know who Ram Dass is? So Ram Dass was on my doctoral committee, and I just loved the man because, you know, he did so much work in end-of-life care and related to the environmental grief I was doing, but it's just the presence, like Lawrence was mentioning it too. Being present with people is so vitally important and something we don't do. You know, everybody has the phone, you know, you're at dinner and the phone is on the table, and you're just thinking of other things and we're so busy. But being with people, I think can help. But the anticipatory grief is, as you mentioned, looking at the sixth mass extinction. It's trying to reconcile what you can do. What steps can you take? I hope that helps. It was a great question.
I think recognizing, you know, as I get older, anticipating the fact that I'm not going to be here, and feeling into how much I love being alive. You know, there's this African proverb, you know, when death finds you, may it find you alive. And I think it's a good idea to grieve our own death a lot before we actually die. And that's another way to, I have a song that emerged a little while ago. It goes, the afterlife would have to be seriously grieving to even hold a candle to this life. And that comes out of really grieving my death, but also awakening to how much I love my life fiercely and this living world.
Thanks so much for doing this. My name is Libby Roderick. I'm joining you from Alaska, so I appreciate a lot of what's going on. We are, of course, in the full-on meltdown up there in terms of climate. So, and grew up because of the dangers up there and a number of things, knowing every day, more or less, that I could die, which I think has helped a great deal, and have grieved for decades and worked with people in groups on this and so forth. And so I just really appreciate what people are doing. The piece I just wanted to call out, and maybe somebody wants to speak to it a wee bit more, having done, as you've said, daily reconfiguration of my being in the face of what's going on, literally, is, you mentioned it, and I think perhaps, Lawrence, you did as well, the ways in which if you do full-on grieving, you can rise up with then more courage, right? And I'm all about, have been all about, at least, how do we what's the word? Cultivate courage in ourselves and others. And was I hearing you say, and also you and others who wish to speak to it, the role of grieving in that process, where we go through that process and then find ourselves even more passionately willing to risk everything for what we love.
This is fairly intimidating. You have really a beautiful panel up there, and I'm really grateful for having this conversation. And I just wanted to say that it just occurred to me that in Mexico, I've been a grief counselor off and on, and I've worked with seniors for many years. And one of the things that I love about it is that when I can name for people their grieving, and I can give them the list of symptoms of grieving, and they can go, yeah, that's what I feel like. There's so much relief that they have. It just changes them. You can see it happen. So for me, just right now, having this conversation, I'm feeling a sense of encouragement that we're having this conversation. I love the permissionary. I love that, because that's what we're finally starting. That if we're starting to name this, then we're giving permission to people to be able to go there. And maybe it's one of the avenues, those places of common ground, because that's how we can move forward, is finding our common ground, acknowledging what it is that we love, because what we love we want to take care of. And this is another place of common ground, I think. So I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you for the great work that you're doing, panel. I know I have a few years left, and I've had a rich life. I'm interested in helping people face what's happening to the planet. And I just don't know. I think seniors have a special advantage and responsibility to be real. But I feel on very uncertain grounds when it comes to young people. And I wonder if you would talk about that, please.
I think what I'm sensing, you're feeling on uncertain ground, and you're being present with your feelings as an elder, that's part of it. You're being real, and we are on uncertain ground. I mean, I think that's, I'm not sure if there's something else you want to say, but I'm just feeling you're speaking your truth. There's a value in your speaking your truth. It's not about being something. The thing is, when we speak the truth, it's not necessarily what somebody else wants to hear. When we speak our truth, or when we share the details of where we are. I've been in a group where I just read a couple poems and shared a few statistics, and it was like I dropped a bomb. But it's like I'm like, I just want to be here with you. This is where we find ourselves right now, and it hurts, and there's different reactions to it. I've seen, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. I've seen, oh, I'm numb. So, let me some analyzation. Here's how we're going to come through this. A lot of the work that when I work with young people and older people is I invite them to have conversations with the natural world, to actually have a conversation about it, and to open their imagination so that they can hear back what the natural world might offer back. And dreams and deep imagination, be in the unknowing with them, and open them to the ones of them who are more wise than our minds, the beings of the natural world, our dream time, our deep imagination. There's others out there. There's more to reality than what we think. We don't know everything, and we don't actually know very much. And so that's where I would invite.
I just wanted, it's kind of tied to the question before about courage. As I understand courage, it's comes from the French word, which I don't know how to say, but something like cœur, which means heart. And that courage means to stand by your heart, to stand by what was what most deeply matters. And just in the last few weeks, I've been with mostly everyone I work with are younger than me in the sense that they're like in their 20s and 30s often, and young men in particular, and particularly in certain regions of the country. If I'm in a circle and I'm sharing along with everyone else and I burst into tears, I get from most of the men, the younger men, they say, "That's the most amazing thing I ever saw. I've never seen a man cry. My father never cried, my grandfather, I just simply haven't seen men cry." And I think, and it's done, they speak with great gratitude. It's like they take courage from that, take courage from each other, through being, as I said, permissionaries and seeing, wow, something I'm feeling in my life that I've never let myself go to. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do. And specifically, if you can also, if it comes from, your frustration, your grief, your bewilderment, your utter bafflement around what how can I, wow, and to burst in, then we become in communion, because they're feeling it too, and it matters to be able to share that and carry it together rather than, and so that's why we do this work, is to recognize that we can't do it alone. Sometimes we can, parts of it, but it is an enlivening and encouraging thing to know I don't have to get over it, I don't have to heal it even, because actually it's healing me. They used to say grieving is the healing feeling, and it's really bad for business, because we want people to feel kind of like, what, there's something but they're not, it's not even identifying. And so they just, they're more prone to trying to stuff it with addiction or to buying or whatever, some kind of consumption is going to help, rather than the expression of what's true with your people. And that begins to be such a rich experience.
I want to just add real quick one thing to address what Libby said. First of all, living 10 years in Anchorage during the time when I became politicized, it's really great to see you after listening to so much of your music. I have to plug Libby Roderick. He doesn't know her stuff. But just to add that we have nothing to lose. Like, why would we hold back or be afraid to have these deep, deep feelings, all of them, about what's happening on the planet right now? Like, if we're not going to do it now, when are we going to do it? And those of us who've been fortunate enough to have near-death experiences of whatever variety, and I'm not encouraging people to go out and seek them out or anything, but after you go through one or several, there's nothing to lose. There's really nothing to lose. And in that sense, now we are all in one. For sure. Because we don't know how this is going to end. It's the first time. The future's not guaranteed. And so, what do we have to lose? Just wanted to add that.
I think we have time for one more question.
It was to speak to the courage thing too. When it all boils down to honesty and being honest about the pain or the horrors around us, and when we can be honest about that, and even grateful for the transformative process, we set ourselves up to be open to getting to the other side eventually. Because we're being honest with the pain, we can be honest with the joy, and we don't always give ourselves permission. And everything cycles, so there's that gratitude that even in the hurt, there's just knowing that nothing's forever. accept change, and that it's gonna process to transformation and growth, and then it's being courageous in that too. Thanks.
I just wanted to say, today I heard some war metaphors and battle metaphors used, and I think one of the things that grief teaches, and I think I read it in Charles's book and the work that Libby does, that if we come forward with the vulnerability and with the grief and our deep caring, we've so polarized our country right now that, I feel like we're fighting a civil war again and we never stopped. And I remember one of the things in the book, Charles, you were talking about, some head of a corporation that's doing some really nasty stuff to the planet, but you said, yeah, he's doing exactly what he was always told, which was the right thing to do, which was make a pile of money. And that there's part of what grief teaches, and part of is vulnerability. And we have to have conversations with people throughout this country, and I want to ask if somebody has something to say about that. And I know that Libby does a lot of work about how to talk about difficult things, and we're not hearing each other. We're just screaming at each other. And I think that the speaking from the heart around this grief opens the vulnerability so that we can actually talk about what we care about and why we care about it so much in a way that people can hear it. And I'd like to know if you were meaning that when you were writing, or,
Yeah, that part of the book was basically making a point about judgment and the people that we channel our rage onto. As Pancho Ramos Stierli says, there's a victim on both ends of the gun. So one way to maintain the status quo is to go to war against a symptom, or against, and the perpetrators are a symptom. So the denial so rage gets diverted onto something that actually perpetuates the status quo by diverting attention away from the underlying causes. Grief works in a similar way when it is denied and unable to exercise its intended purpose. It gets channeled onto what we call despair. Despair is a symptom of unprocessed grief. We are, to the extent that we have unprocessed grief, we will be attracted to hopeless narratives. Even if some corner of our mind recognizes that this is just a story. And the example of people going sent to hospice who then live another 10 years. People who have a terminal cancer diagnosis who get better, and all of the things that have happened to us in our lives that defy scientific explanation and tell us that the world may not work the way that we thought it did. Do these fit into the despair narrative? And if not, why are we leaving them out? It's not rational. It's a symptom of something deeper. And I guess that just returns me to my point about grief being a way to complete reality and to bring the excluded back in. And when we do that, perhaps the despair narrative no longer wields such power, and we are able to access a genuine kind of hope, which is, it kind of got a bad name this morning, but hope is the stirring of a possibility that is beyond your mental framework of how the world works. So it seems irrational, but it's actually the stirring of something true. And you can feel the difference between that and false hope. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time just for one more.
Hope. I never understood until this morning that why people don't like hope. I got a perspective that I understand now. And here I hear that pitting hope against hopelessness is no longer an option. And I kind of sense there's a relationship, but I'd like to hear someone explain that.
I worked in the AIDS epidemic for years and years and years, and all through the 80s and the 90s, and there was no hope. I mean, these folks that I knew, that I was working with, were going to die, and hospice workers have that too. And but hope and hopelessness are actually the same thing in a way, because when you can put them down, what you get is what is in the moment.
Just want to share in one of the roles I play, people go through initiation passages, quests, which are kind of a psycho-spiritual death process, and one of the things that we invite is letting go of hope, or that that saying hope, opposed to hope, it be hope for the wrong thing. And if you're going through a passage into something and you don't know where you're going to get on the other side, if you hold on too tightly, it doesn't mean that you might still have visions, possibilities, glimmers, longings, but if you hold on too tightly to hope for a particular thing, there might be something that stops you from going into the initiation of the unknown, the liminal of where you're being carried next. So that's just what comes to me because I see our world in a state of that kind of initiation at the moment, of a story is dying and we don't know what's next, and we're in a liminal space, and we might hope, we might have visions, but we really don't know, so we can't really hold on too tightly.
And I was actually just wanted to share that I shared a story towards the end of my book of a dear friend of mine who 3 years ago I thought he was in hospice, and quadriplegic with pneumonia, 3.5 weeks in the ICU. You know, anyone that knows when a quadriplegic person has any kind of respiratory thing, it's super serious, let alone pneumonia. And so literally sitting there thinking he's in hospice, and then literally watching the nurse administer the morphine in the port of his neck. And then 30 minutes later, nothing happens, and he's like, I want to live. And so the nurse says, all right, you going to do what I say? He said, yeah. And he's still here. But then now, I'm with him 3 days ago. He's in Olympia, and he has stage 4 cancer and is getting chemo as we speak. And I'm down there visiting him, just being present. Just being present. Don't know what's going to happen. It's like, oh, this looks really bad. But don't know. So be present and love. And then may all actions come from that place. And I think that's where, whether it's working to save something or whatever it is that we do, if it comes from that place, watch out. You never know what's going to happen. And if it all goes anyway, it all goes to hell, and all really is lost, we're going to go out living big time. That's to me, that's my ideal. Yeah, be here now. That's it. It all comes back around to that.
I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for being part of this panel. And I want to thank all of you who showed up to this panel. You're obviously courageous people taking a step in the direction of your grief. And if you want to keep taking another step, please join us for the grief ceremony later tonight after the keynote at 8:30, 8:45 in 204 building. And also for people who are local to this area, next weekend we have a day-long grief ritual called the Grief and Gratitude Lodge, which I have little flyers up here that you can take if you want to learn more about that. And I was hoping we could actually close with that song, Lawrence.
Through all things that move, through all things. So we're seeing the whole thing, everybody. Lean into the world and trust the deeper currents that move through all things. And the other part goes, embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. Embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. So you guys go. Lean into the world and trust the deeper currents that move